So, as you can see, conversation already started because this is the hot one today. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni will deliver his maiden medium-term budget policy statement, or the mini-budget, to Parliament later today. And most of the medium-term fiscal planning would have been completed before Minister Mboweni was appointed, and that was 2 weeks ago. Now, the new Finance Minister will be delivering the fiscus in the midst of the country's very trying economical times. And recent economic decisions such as the VAT increase, the skyrocketing of fuel prices, those have been blamed for having done little to protect the most vulnerable in society from its impact. And joining us now for further discussion on this is Dr. Peter Baur, who is a senior economics lecturer at the University of Johannesburg, and Zwelinzima Vavi from the South African Federation of Trade Unions, their General Secretary. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Sakina, for having us.
So let's start here. I mean, whether the policy statement receives a thumbs up, a thumbs down, it doesn't really matter. The question is, what can Tito Mboweni realistically do to set us back on some sort of a reasonable path economically? Mr. Vavi.
What he cannot do is to repeat the same medicine that have dismally failed South Africa's economy for the past 24 years, which is neoliberal programs, which is this obsession with macroeconomic policies, of fiscal discipline, of a tight monetary policies, the obsession with inflation, removing of the exchange controls, removing trade protections, and allowing everybody to come dump everything, every good all over the world into the South African economy. For that have led us to these catastrophic figures that we're talking about. 37% unemployment, over 40% for women and black people, 63% for young people. We're now the 6th country in the whole world with such levels of unemployment. We've become the most unequal. We have people, 14 million people last night went to bed without anything to eat. That's the extent of the poverty. What he can do is to look at what, for example, other countries have done in response to their own crisis. We acknowledge that the past 9-10 years in South Africa have been particularly difficult because it was a combination of the biggest economic crisis, the capitalist crisis, whose epicenter was the United States of America. But secondly, we also had our own goals, where the president, supported by the very same people who are saying now there is no alternative, and who just cause havoc, deployment, and so much levels of corruption that an economy of our size can ill afford. So if he was to begin to say, let's start where things went wrong, how do we reverse the gear economic policies? And secondly, what is that we can do to persuade and to use carrot and stick, for example, against the people he plays golf with, that he chairs his corporate board meetings, because we know that he's coming from Nampaki, we know that he has his own investment companies with his brothers and all of that. In our view, and everybody knows this, there is a 1.6 trillion rands that is available in cash, which is being hoarded by the big business in the country. Why don't we start there?
I heard that figure being disputed recently.
They can say whatever they want. It's over a 1.6 trillion. They are tomorrow calling everybody investment conference, let's invest. And yet they are having an investment strike. We should be starting there. Secondly, according to all people who are following the studies, they're saying between 2002 and 2011, South African firms moved out of this economy over a trillion rands through illicit cash outflows, mispricing, and illicit trade transfers, all manner of schemes. If we can just say to the government, can you take steps to get us that 1 trillion rand so that we can tax it here and address the crisis of deindustrialization of our economy. And lastly, the Davis Tax Commission says these guys are using something they call aggressive tax planning, which is actually schemes to dodge tax. We're losing 50 billion rands. Now, 50 billion rands will make it unnecessary for us to be paying more extra 7% VAT as we have been punished for the crisis that we did not create as workers just early this year. So we're not expecting this minister to go into any of that direction of the people he plays golf with. He's going to continue to blame the whole crisis on the poor, and he's going to seek to punish us.
People shouting at their television sets, but Mr. Vavi, you also supported some of these directions by supporting the African National Congress at a certain stage when you were with COSATU. You talk about reversing the gains of gear, but since then, we've had GIPSA, we've had ASGISA, we've got a new development plan. All of those things have happened. All of those policy changes have happened in the meantime. So from what Mr. Vavi is saying, Dr. Baur, how practical is it for the new minister to actually come in and make any sort of fundamental change?
I think it is possible. I don't think we should call it a capitalist crisis. I do believe very much in the free markets and allowing the industry to grow. But I think we need to look at the role of the taxpayer. We have to look at the working people who are contributing a large share of their income towards taxes to keep this economy going. And I think sometimes a little bit of tax relief may be necessary for households which are being squeezed from all possible sides. The cost of living is going up, the value of the rand is coming down. We have this, obviously, this persistent unemployment problem. And we need to really focus on the people. What are the people feeling right now? We have a huge growing informal sector, and I think partially a big chunk of the increase in VAT, for example, was to try and collect from this informal sector. We need to realize that this growing informal sector, many of these people are living under the most horrendous conditions. They are not receiving infrastructural support. Many of them do not have access to water or electricity, living in terrible conditions. And we need to somehow reinvest back into our economy. But I don't believe that if we squeeze the taxpayer harder and harder every single year, we are going to achieve those kind of goals. I realize we do need money, and I think our focus should be on bringing in investment into our economy and creating a business environment which is conducive to positive, suitable investment growth. But the right kind of investment, which means that we're going to have to sort of take serious measures to fight against corruption. These stories that have come out recently with bad reporting by some of our auditing companies is not exactly a very impressionable impact on our South African state of affairs.
It is starting to sound like rhetoric. You know, we need to do this, we need to do that. But I want to get to the practicalities of it right now. You're saying, as we all know, South African households are squeezed. You know, they really are suffering at the moment. But what can Tito Mboweni say today as Minister of Finance that will bring some sort of relief to these households? That's where I want to get to. What can he possibly do? What can he say?
The first thing, you must acknowledge the extent of the crisis of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, and take practical steps to confront that problem. Repeating what have been said and with a different face is not going to make any difference. We need a change of direction at the policy level. Give me a practical example. The practical thing I've already said. Look at our fiscal policies. For example, do you know that the corporate taxes, contrary to my friends' beliefs, the corporate taxes were sitting at around 44–45% during the era of apartheid, right up to the last days of apartheid. What did we do? The good boys of neoliberalism? We reduced the corporate taxes to 28% as we speak. Our target is to move it down to 25%. Isn't this in an effort to appease? No. But just imagine the resources that the apartheid regime had and the resources that we do not have at this moment. That those resources were so desperately needed to build our manufacturing base and to address the levels of poverty and inequalities in our society. We chose not to do so because we wanted to be the good boys of the rating agencies and of the international markets, and not the good boys of our people who are desperately hungry and who are desperately angry, as we are now currently seeing all over the South African economy.
Fair point. But the question is, are the two mutually exclusive? You cannot pretend that the ratings agencies are not important, because unfortunately they are. But at the same time, I think Mr. Vavi is correct in that we cannot be budgeting and, creating policy for the ratings agencies. It has to speak to the people of South Africa and what they need, Dr. Baur.
But one of those arguments would be deregulating business sector and protecting the business sector. They are job creators. We can't look at government to create jobs. We got to look at the private sector, and the private sector needs as much support as it possibly can get. I think the more support we give our private sector, and the more we free up our markets, and the more we take steps towards promoting an environment which is conducive to business and investment, the better our opportunities are of actually improving our credit ratings, and at the same time seeing better flows, inward flows of capital that this economy so desperately needs. This
is another, line that we've heard ad nauseum. And at this point, I'm not quite sure what exactly still needs to be done, because, and this is what is lacking overall, just that clarity to say, I want you in the policy to do A, B, C, D, and if you do that, I will invest the 1.6 trillion rand that the private sector is said to be sitting on.
I think Cyril Ramaphosa has already set the stage with his fiscal stimulus package, where he's looking at public works programs and opening. Where we're going to invest in the economy and create some sort of mechanism for spending. But the problem what we have is where we're going to raise the funds in order to achieve this. Are we going to squeeze our taxpayers, or are we going to bring in funds, and we've seen this already, deals with China, etc. But these are monies that are going to have to be repaid, refunded back at some future date. So there becomes a little bit of a danger zone for us as well. We've seen what happened with Zambia and China not being able to repay Chinese debt. So at the same time, we really got to see government spending in the right sectors. Another big issue what we have is, for example, the right mining licenses, access of people to resources, land redistribution issues are coming to the forefront. And maybe we need to look at support mechanisms there too. And it's not just so much rhetoric. I think, and looking at Tito Mboweni's role as governor of the Reserve Bank, where he was absolutely exceptional, we're going to see possibly some very strong leaning towards a fiscal stimulus situation, where we're going to be supporting spending, but hopefully in the right sectors.
Gentlemen, I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't. But this, of course, I suppose, an appetizer towards some of the discussions that will be had around this midterm budget statement. But thank you so much for your time this morning. And political parties, of course, also will be weighing in and giving us their views. But thanks to Zwelinzima Vavi of SAFTU, and from the UJ School of Economics, we have Dr. Baur as well. And our question of the day is also on this particular matter. So tell us, what are your views with regard to the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, and what he should do? Where should he be trimming the fat, as it were, at Morning Live SABC? It's time now for news with